Mama, please. I am begging you. Whatever I have done, tell me. I will fix it. I will do anything.
You have done nothing wrong. That is not why we are here.
Then why? Mama, why are we at the river? It is night. Nobody comes here at night.
Your father married me. This house is mine. Everything in it is mine.
Mama!
Everything. Except you.
Please, please, I am begging you. I will leave tonight. I will pack and go and never come back. You'll never see me again. Just please do not take... Just please. Please do not.
Nobody will hear you out here.
The river Niger took her. She came up a second time. She could see the bank.
Help me! Help me, please!
Nobody is coming.
Somebody is there! God, somebody is in the water. Hold on, I'm coming.
Help me, please.
Give me your hand. Give me your hand.
I cannot.
I have you. I have you. Don't let go. I have you. Don't let go. Who did this to you? Who put you in this river?
My mother.
The night Ada turned 16, her stepmother threw her into the Niger River and walked away without blinking. There was no argument that started it, no final breaking point that anyone could point to later and say that was the moment everything changed. The hatred had always been there. It lived in the house like a second tenant. It sat at the dinner table. It followed Ada to school in the mornings and waited for her at the gate when she came home. Chioma had carried it into the house the day she married Ada's father, Emmanuel, and she had fed it quietly for 4 years until it grew large enough to act. Ada had tried everything a child knows how to try. She had cooked. She had cleaned. She had scrubbed the compound floor on her knees before sunrise so that Chioma would wake up to a house that shone. She had called her mama, even though the word felt strange and hollow in her mouth. She had swallowed every insult, every slap that landed without reason, every meal pushed in front of her late and cold, while Chioma's own children ate first and ate well. She had kept her pain folded small and hidden because her father was a man who did not like trouble, and Chioma had learned quickly how to be his peace. Emmanuel loved his wife. That was the truth no one in the house could argue with. He loved her loudly and visibly and without question, the way a man loves a woman who has made herself indispensable to his comfort. And Chioma had been very careful. She was never cruel in front of him. Her voice around Emmanuel was soft and her hands were busy in the kitchen, and her children played neatly and quietly and never caused any scene that would draw his eye to what was really happening inside those walls. It was Ada who cried, Ada who flinched, Ada who always seemed to be the problem. By the time Ada was 15, her father had stopped defending her at all. Not because he didn't love her. He told himself he loved her, told himself the story of a good father every morning when he looked in the mirror. But because Chioma had sewn the story so tightly for 4 years that he had begun to believe it. Ada was difficult. Ada was difficult.
Ungrateful. Ada caused problems with the other children.
Ada never appreciated anything. Chioma would say these things with sadness in her eyes, and Emmanuel would nod slowly, and the distance between him and his daughter would grow another inch. Ada's mother had died when Ada was 11. Her name was Neka, and she had been a woman of extraordinary gentleness. Ada remembered her in pieces: the smell of her palm oil soup, the sound of her singing in the early morning before the house woke up, the weight of her hand on Ada's forehead when Ada was sick. Neka had loved Ada with the kind of love that a child carries in their body long after the person is gone, like warmth stored in the bones. When she died, something in the house died with her. Emmanuel grieved for a year, and then Chioma arrived, and the house tried to become something new. But grief does not simply leave because new furniture arrives. It stays in the corners. It waits. Ada used to visit her mother's grave on Sundays when Chioma let her out of the house. She would sit on the grass and talk quietly as though Neka could hear her, telling her about school, about the girls in her class who were kind, about the teacher who had told her she was clever and that she should keep reading. She never told her mother about the bruises. She didn't want to trouble her. The night of Ada's 16th birthday, her father had traveled to Onitsha for business. He had left 3 days before and was not due back until the following week. Ada had cooked rice and stew that morning and set a small portion aside for herself, the way she always did, taking only what she needed and leaving everything else for Chioma and the children. It was a Saturday. The generator was running. Chioma's children were watching television in the sitting room, and their voices and laughter filled the house in a way that made Ada feel invisible, like she existed in a slightly different version of the same building, one where no light reached. She was washing her plate at the back of the house when Chioma came to find her. There was something different in Chioma's face that evening. Not the usual tight coldness, something more settled, more decided, like a woman who has made up her mind about something and is no longer carrying the weight of the decision. She told Ada to follow her. She said they were going to the river to fetch something Emmanuel had left with a neighbor near the bank before he traveled. She said it quietly, almost kindly. Ada should have understood then that kindness from Chioma was never free. But she was 16, and she wanted to believe that people could change, because that is what 16 believes. They walked for 20 minutes through the edges of the town, past the last cluster of houses, past the cassava farm, down the path that narrowed until it was only wide enough for one person at a time, until the sound of water filled the air and the Niger appeared dark and wide and moving in front of them. There was no neighbor. There was nothing waiting. Ada realized it the moment they arrived at the bank, and Chioma stopped walking and turned to look at her with that settled face. She begged. She held the woman's hand and she begged with everything she had, with all 4 years of swallowed pain, with every morning she had scrubbed the floor, with every mama she had forced through her teeth. She begged the way a child begs who does not yet understand that some decisions are not made in the moment. They are made long before, and they are not unmade by tears. Chioma pushed her. The water was cold and immediate and without mercy. Ada went under and came up choking and went under again. She could not swim properly. She had never been taught, but her body fought. The body always fights before the mind catches up with what is happening. She kicked, she clawed at the water, she broke the surface gasping and screaming, but the bank was already far behind her. And the current was pulling her further, and the darkness was everywhere, and she was so cold, so impossibly cold. She went under 3 times. The 3rd time she came up, she had stopped screaming. There was no air left for screaming. There was only the water, and the dark, and the distant sound of the river, and the strange distant thought that her mother's grave was not far from here, that Neka was somewhere in this same earth, and that maybe it was not the worst thing in the world to go toward her. the fisherman's lamp found her first. His name was Baba Kelechi. He was 62 years old, and he had been fishing the Niger for 40 of those years, and he had pulled many things from this river in that time: catfish and tilapia, lost nets, once a motorcycle that had slipped off a ferry. He had never pulled out a child. He saw the yellow dress first, then the arm, then the face. He moved faster than a man his age should have been able to move. He threw his net aside, and he reached, and he pulled with both hands until Ada was in his boat, coughing river water onto the wooden floor, alive by a margin so thin it had no proper measurement. He wrapped her in his fishing cloth. He did not ask questions. He rowed. Ada lay in the bottom of the boat and looked up at the sky and breathed. Just breathed. One breath, and then another, and then another. The stars were out. She had not noticed that they were stars. Baba Kelechi's wife was a woman named Mama Kelechi. Everyone in their community on the outskirts of Asaba called her this, and no one remembered her given name anymore. She was round and warm, and she opened the door of their small house and took one look at the girl her husband was carrying and did not ask a single question before she had blankets out and water boiling and her voice low and steady and calming in the way of a woman who had raised 6 children and knew what shock looked like on a young face. She asked no questions that night. In the morning, she asked one, "What happened to you, my daughter?" Ada told her everything. Mama Kelechi listened without interrupting. She sat very still, and her face did not move very much, but her eyes said everything her face was too disciplined to show. When Ada finished, the old woman was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "You will not go back to that house." It was not a question. It was not even a decision. It was simply a fact that Mama Kelechi had decided was true, and in this woman's house, what she decided was true became true. Ada stayed. She was given a corner of the room that Mama Kelechi's youngest daughter had left behind when she married. There was a mattress and a window and a small wooden shelf where Ada could put her things, except Ada had no things. Everything she owned was in her father's house. So the shelf stayed empty for a while, and then slowly, over weeks and months, it began to fill. A comb, a bar of soap Mama Kelechi pressed into her hands one morning, a notebook, a pen, small things, but they were hers, and no one would take them. Baba Kelechi registered Ada in the secondary school 3 kilometers from their home. He went himself early one morning and he spoke to the principal in the way old men speak when they have decided something must happen and are prepared to wait as long as necessary until it does. Ada was enrolled before the week was out. She walked the 3 kilometers every morning and 3 kilometers back every evening, and she did not complain once. She was quiet that first year. Not the quiet of someone broken, the quiet of someone rebuilding. She sat in the front of every class. She answered questions carefully, not to impress anyone, but because she had decided that her mind was the one thing Chioma had not been able to touch, and she was going to use it as though her life depended on it, because she had learnt, floating in the Niger with the stars above her, that her life did depend on it. Her teachers noticed. It is hard not to notice a student who reads every book twice and asks the kind of questions that make a teacher sit up straighter. Her English teacher, a young woman named Mrs. Okoye, began lending her books from her own shelf. Her mathematics teacher entered her name for a state competition without telling her until the morning she needed to board a bus to Abka to sit the exam. She placed second in the state. The certificate came in the mail, and Mama Kelechi held it with both hands, and her eyes filled with the kind of tears that have nothing to do with sadness. Back in Emmanuel's house, word had traveled the way word travels in Nigerian towns, on the tongues of neighbors and through the doors of churches and across market stalls where women buy tomatoes and exchange news in the same breath. Someone said they had seen Ada. Someone said she was alive. Someone said she was in school near Asaba and that an old fishing family was keeping her. Chioma heard. She told Emmanuel that Ada had run away because she was a stubborn and ungrateful child, which was what she had told him the night Ada disappeared, and which Emmanuel had believed because it was easier than the alternative. When the news came that Ada was alive and in school, Emmanuel felt relief flood through him, and then, quietly, a question he did not know how to ask his wife. He pushed the question down. He was very practiced at pushing things down. Ada did not reach out to her father, not for a long time. She had thought about it in those early months, lying on Mama Kelechi's daughter's mattress at night, staring at the ceiling, turning the idea over. She loved her father. She had always loved him even when he failed her, the way children love parents who failed them, with a love that is tangled up in grief and longing and the memory of who that person used to be before they became someone else. But she had learned something floating in the Niger. She had learned that love without protection is not enough, and she was not ready to go back to a place where she had not been protected. She focused on school instead. She wrote her WAEC examinations at the top of her class. She applied to the University of Benin to study accounting. She received her admission letter on a Tuesday afternoon, and she walked home from the post office holding it against her chest with both hands. And when she walked through Mama Kelechi's door, the old woman took one look at her face and started crying before Ada could even speak. University was not easy. It was not supposed to be easy. Nobody told Ada it would be. Baba Kelechi was retired, and Mama Kelechi sold akara at the roadside from 5 in the morning. They could not fund a university education on their own. Ada knew this. She had known it since the admission letter arrived, and the joy of it had folded gently to make room for the practical question behind it. She found a way. She applied for every bursary and scholarship the university offered, and 3 that were offered by outside organizations. She got 2 of them, not enough to cover everything, but enough to cover the most important things. She tutored students in mathematics on evenings and weekends, charging 500 naira a session, then 1,000, then 1,500 as her reputation spread. She kept every naira recorded in a small notebook, and she spent nothing she did not have to spend. She ate simply. She wore the same clothes until they wore thin. She did not complain. In her second year, she added a freelance bookkeeping client, a small provision store owner who needed his accounts organized and could not afford a proper accountant. In her third year, she had 4 clients. By the time she was in her final year, she was running a small but functioning bookkeeping service from her student hostel room and had more clients than she had hours to serve them. She graduated with a first-class degree. The day of her convocation, she sat in the hall in her gown and looked at the ceiling of the auditorium and thought about the river. She thought about the cold and the dark and the current pulling her under. She thought about looking up and seeing the stars and the strange peace that had come over her before Baba Kelechi's lamp found her. She thought about how close it had been, how thin the margin. She thought about her mother's grave and the Sunday she used to sit on the grass and talk. "Mama," she said quietly inside herself when no one could hear, "I made it." The tears came then, but they were not sad tears. They were the tears of someone who has crossed a very long distance and arrived somewhere real. Baba Kelechi and Mama Kelechi were in the crowd. She had bought their bus tickets. Herself had booked them into a small guest house near the campus, and she had gone to pick them up in a taxi. And the old man had looked at her in her gown and said nothing at all for a full minute, which was the most moved Ada had ever seen him. She built her business properly after graduation. She registered it at Daisy Financial Services, and she moved from the student hostel into a small office space in Asaba that she shared with 2 other young professionals. She was 24 years old, and she had 6 staff members by the time she was 26. By 28, she had moved into her own office on Nebisi Road, and her client list included 3 mid-sized companies and a real estate firm. She bought Baba Kelechi and Mama Kelechi a house. It was not a large house. It was a solid 3-bedroom in a quiet part of Asaba with a proper fence and a generator and a kitchen large enough for Mama Kelechi to cook in the way she deserved to cook. She handed them the keys on a Sunday afternoon in the compound of their old small house, and Mama Kelechi sat down right there in the yard and wept openly. And Baba Kelechi stood very straight and very still, and his jaw worked for a long time before he was able to say anything at all. He said, "Your mother would be proud." Ada held those words inside her for a long time afterward. She took them out sometimes when things were hard and held them up to the light. It was Chioma's eldest child who told her father the truth. The boy's name was Tobena, and he was 23 now, and he had grown into a young man with a conscience that his upbringing had not entirely managed to suppress. He had been 12 years old the night his mother took Ada to the river. He had been awake. He had heard them leave. He had stood at the window and watched the direction they walked, and he had known, in the way children know things they cannot yet name, that something was wrong. He had carried it for 11 years. He told his father on a quiet evening in Emmanuel's sitting room in Onitsha. He sat across from the old man and he told him everything. The night, the direction, the river, the yellow dress Ada had been wearing, the way his mother returned alone and went to bed without a sound. Emmanuel sat without moving for a very long time. Then he covered his face with his hands. What came out of him was not a sound that belongs to any word. It was the sound a man makes when 11 years of things he chose not to see arrive all at once and there is no more space to put them anywhere. He went to Chioma that same night. Not with anger, with something worse than anger, with the cold and absolute clarity of a man who finally understood exactly what he had allowed inside his house, inside his life, inside the years that should have been his daughters. Chioma denied it. She wept. She called on God. She called on Emmanuel's love for her. She said Tuwena was lying, that the boy had always been troubled, that she could not believe her own child would say such a thing. Emmanuel looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "I know my son. I know when he is telling the truth." He filed for divorce within the month. The community spoke about it for years afterward, not because divorce was unusual, but because of what came with it. The story that Tobena had told, which spread the way stories spread in those communities, unstoppably, touching every house, every conversation, every Sunday gathering. Chioma had always been careful about her reputation. She had built it brick by brick, the same way she had built Emmanuel's trust, slowly and with great patience. In the space of 3 weeks, it was gone. She moved back to her family's compound in Imo State quietly in the early morning before the neighbors were fully awake. But Asaba had already called ahead. These things always do. Emmanuel found Ada. He drove to Asaba on a Thursday and he sat in the reception area of Adezi Financial Services for 40 minutes before Ada agreed to see him. She came out in a well-cut blue dress with her hair pulled back and her face entirely composed, and she looked at him the way someone looks at a person they have spent a long time learning not to need.
She let him speak. He spoke for a long time. He said all the things that needed to be said, not because saying them changed anything, but because they were true and they had been unsaid for too long, and he was an old man now who understood the weight of things left unsaid. He did not ask for forgiveness. He was wise enough by now to understand that forgiveness is not something you ask for. It is something that is given or not given in the other person's own time and on their own terms. Ada listened to everything. Then she said, "I know, Dad." Not, "I forgive you." Not, "It's okay." Just, "I know." Which was honest. Which was the most she could give him right then. And he understood that. And he accepted it with both hands because it was more than he deserved. She did not close the door on him, but she did not rush toward him either. She let things move at the pace that felt true. He came to Asaba once a month and they had lunch at a small restaurant near her office, and they talked about ordinary things: his health, her business, the news, the price of things. Slowly, the ordinary things made space for the harder things. Slowly, the harder things became possible to say out loud. It took 3 years, but the door stayed open.
Mama Kelechi's health began to decline when Ada was 31. Her legs gave her trouble and her heart was not as strong as it had been once. And the doctor in Asaba said these were the things that came with age and that she needed rest and monitoring and care. Ada moved them into a wing of her own house. She had bought a proper home in a quiet estate in Asaba by then, and she hired a nurse who came in the mornings and she checked on Mama Kelechi herself every evening without fail. The old woman lived 4 more years, good years, years of being properly cared for, of eating well, of watching Ada move through the world with the kind of authority that made Mama Kelechi feel that she had done something right, that the night Baba Kelechi threw his net into the dark water of the Niger had mattered, that she had made a decision worth making. She died on a Sunday morning in April, peacefully, in a clean room in Ada's house, with Ada holding her hand. Baba Kelechi did not last long after that, 6 months. They buried him next to his wife in the town where they had fished the river together for 40 years. Ada stood at his grave in the late afternoon light, and she thought about lamps, about how a single lamp moving across dark water had been the difference between everything and nothing, about how much can hang on one ordinary person choosing to look toward the river instead of away from it. She built a community scholarship in their names the following year, the Kelechi Foundation. It funded secondary school fees for girls in riverine communities in Delta and Anambra, states who could not afford to stay in school. The first year, it covered 11 girls. By the 5th year, it was covering over 100. Chioma's children grew up and scattered. Tobena built a decent life for himself. He carried his honesty forward, which was the best thing he could have done with what his mother had given him. The other children carried the weight of what they knew in different ways and to different degrees. None of them returned to Asaba. Chioma herself grew old in her family compound in Imo, a woman diminished by the slow arithmetic of consequence. She had wanted Emmanuel's house and Emmanuel's name and the comfort that came with them. She had pushed a child into a river for it, and in the end she had nothing. No husband, no standing, no story she could tell about herself that felt clean. She only had the memory of a yellow dress and dark water, which visited her more nights than she would ever admit to anyone. Ada was 35 when she sat in a chair on the stage of a conference in Lagos and spoke to 400 people about building businesses from nothing. She wore a white blouse and her hair was natural and her voice was steady and clear. She did not mention the river in that speech.
Some things you carry privately, and that is not weakness. It is the knowledge that certain things belong to you and not to an audience. But she thought about it on the drive back to the hotel afterward. The darkness and the cold and the current, the stars, the lamp. She thought about a girl in a yellow dress who had decided, without knowing she was deciding, to keep kicking. She looked out the window at Lagos, moving past in all its noise and color, an impossible life, and she felt something she had learned to recognize over the years. Not happiness exactly, something quieter and more durable than happiness. She felt the specific peace of someone who went into the water and came out the other side. Was it fair what Chioma did? Or do you believe she suffered enough for what she chose? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched you, please like and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs it today. And drop a comment. We want to hear from you. God bless you.